Hello, good evening. Thank you everybody for coming. Hope you are having a great evening and a great week. I know this time of the year, everybody's really busy, getting tense, being tense a little bit, getting ready to, prepare for your bench test, your interview, all that good stuff. And it was a difficult time. But one you must go through to get to your destination, your final destination that you want to go to. So a few people here have already been emailed me their questions ahead of time, or put some questions that they wanted me to answer in the chat box already. If you have any questions, start putting them in the chat room right now. I will be giving priority to questions related to directly like how to do something in a practice situation. So for instance, like, oh, how do you keep your interproximal margins thin when you do a crown, whatever, things like that, over, oh, like, how do I improve my chances, or like what should I ask the interviewer, which was actually a question that did come in. But by the way, we did have a workshop. Kevin had a workshop on that just last week, what to ask the interviewer. So things like that. So I will be giving priority to the questions directly related to like doing the bench test work, like in action. Yeah, for the time being, that I feel is the most relevant to the most people. And yeah, so for those of you who might not know me, just in case you're new, this is your first workshop, whatever the case may be, my name is Dr. Alyssa Marshall. And just like you, I am an internationally trained dentist. And like many of you, I also didn't make it in my first year. First year, I tried. I did get 2 interview calls, one with and one without a bench test. Bench test wasn't really the factor. I mean, I botched both first year, but I didn't get accepted to either. Second year, when I was redoing everything, I decided, well, if I don't get in this year, I'm actually go back to my home country. And I meant it. But, I didn't want to. And so I put in everything I had, and I worked really hard for a year. And I know many, many of you are going through something similar like that. So the second year, I rethought and reworked everything: applications, bench tests, interview, like literally everything. And me as a person, I was the same. However, with that, everything changed, and I got called from 14 schools. I went to 10 interviews. 9 of them had a bench test, and then I stopped attending interviews after I reached a point where I knew that I liked the school that I got an acceptance to better than a school that was inviting me. So after that point, it was like, well, what's the point? So I did stop going. Yeah, and then 9 schools accepted me right off the bat. So all I really wanted was one acceptance that year. I didn't even care where in the country. I was like, I don't care where, just one school accept me. I'll go anywhere in the country, it doesn't matter. But I overdid it a little bit. And because of that, I started to have friends reached out to me asking for help. And obviously, I wanted to help them. And so I did. And as they got in, somehow the word started to get out, and their friends, the friends of friends, started to reach out to me. And that's actually how IDC started. So since 2013, we've been working with dentists from all around the world to help them get into an advanced denting program. And yeah, so that's a story about me and how IDC started and all that good stuff. enough about me now. I have a feeling that this will be a very, very full hour. For whatever reason, whenever we do like an Ask Me Anything session, the further time goes along, the more questions start to come in. So in the beginning, the question rate is slow, and then as I start to answer questions, that must like prompt people to remember, like, oh, that's right, like I was struggling with that as well. So it must do something like that. So just a tip in terms of asking questions, because we are not like I'm talking to you in voice, but you're talking back to me in chat. Because of that limitation, and you'll see that the chat room already is like moving, right? And so it's best if I do not have to ask you a follow-up question for you to clarify what you mean by that question. Like if you just say something like, oh, my box is big, my question is then, in which direction? Buccolingual, mesiodistal, occlusogingival, or all? You know, like, so when you ask me a question in the chat box, be as detailed as possible. There's really no such thing as being too detailed. It will just give me a clear picture in terms of what exactly you're struggling with, so that I can actually direct you and give you more tangible things that will actually be more helpful. If you ask me a one-liner question, my response will pretty naturally also be vague, because I don't know a lot of your background information. So tell me more than less, more than what you think you might need to tell me. Just be redundant. It doesn't matter. There's really no such thing as telling me too many details. If there are too many details, I'll just glance over it. No big deal. But that will make sure that whatever we are talking about, like, is going to be more helpful to you, because you're obviously here because you wanted your question answered, right? All right, so, and as I said, I'll be giving priority to the questions that are very tangibly how to do something in a preparation restoration kind of situation over other types of questions. And also, just so that you know, wow, the question link is already very, very long. But just so that you know, there is a little bit of delay between when I speak and when you hear me. And so if I do ask clarifying questions, that lag will also come into play. That's just a FYI. And by the way, before we get too busy and I forget, if you have an interview coming up very soon, I wish you the best of luck. I know it's very, very nerve-wracking and all that, but I really do wish you the best of luck. And yeah. All right, I feel for you. Okay, let's get, I'm just gonna dive into the question link. If I look away, I'm just looking at my second monitor to get to my question list and whatnot, but I'll try not to do that too much. Okay, this question came in through email. It was actually a more specific question about SIU, but this actually applies to many, many schools, which, you know how many schools don't actually give out guidelines for a bench test? And if that's the case, like, what guidelines do you follow was the question. And even though this is not a tangibly bench test related question, I thought it was a great question. So because this will relate to a lot of you in terms of, like, yeah, a lot of schools won't tell you anything. They'll just be like, hey, just do a class 2 on number 4, or a MO or a DO on number 5, whatever. And that's all they will tell you. And you may be like, well, what's the guidelines? You want to go for the very classical guidelines. You don't want to do anything fancy or out of the way in any way. You want to go for the very classical guidelines. So if you are a bench test mastery member, whatever I'm talking about inside bench test mastery, that is that. So you don't have to worry about it. Like, just follow the guidelines inside there and don't worry about it. If you're not a bench test mastery member, if you, the Studevant's book, the Operative Dentistry Manual, the book from Studevant's is a great classic book that many schools follow. That would actually be my go-to reference for the guidelines, whatever, for doing for doing preparations. But yeah, so you want to go for the most classical possible way of doing the preparation in those cases. Okay. This is another email question that came through in email. When prepping a second premolar on my typeodont, I found that due to the fact that the premolar is leaning on the molar, the more I prepare the box, the more the premolar leans into the adjacent tooth and closes up the clearance that I have prepared. How can I prepare a tooth in that case? This is a difficult situation, and many of you will find yourself in a situation like this if you are going to, if you're working with a Columbia typeodont, if you're going to a school that's going to test you on a Columbia typeodont, this is a situation that you may end up with very easily. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Columbia typeodonts are pretty unpredictable in what their contact is like, and what this applicant is describing is like the worst case, right? Like the contacts are so heavy that once you actually create clearance, the tooth leans in more. You know, if that happens, I'm really sorry to say you have to increase that clearance. There's nothing you can do to really prevent it leaning in, because, you know, the tooth is going to do what it's going to do. However, you can predict a little bit. Now, there's no way to predict how much it will lean in. That's just not possible. But when you're looking at your typeodont and you see that, let's say, I guess for this applicant, it is a second premolar, and it was also clarified that it was a class 2 DO on a second premolar. Now, this can happen on a first molar, just like this, if this person was preparing a MO on the first molar adjoining the second premolar, it is likely that the same thing would have happened as well. And it's not happening, like, it doesn't have to always happen at this particular location. It can happen anywhere. So whenever you get a Columbia typeodont, please examine it before you start jumping into it. It's really hard to, like, in the middle of your preparation, to like stop what you're doing and be like, okay, let me now study my typeodont. Like, once you start going, you've kind of started, you're on the roll. It's really hard to pull back. But before you start is a great time to look at it. So what you want to be looking at, is the contacts. And I actually don't have a tooth that is like that, where it is really heavy in its contact. But if it is, what you'll see is contacts that are long. And you should suspect the fact that once you break the contact, the tooth will start leaning in if, let's say you're working on this tooth right here, and it is adjoining this tooth with a very strong, heavy contact. Then look at how this, like at the mesial of this contact and a distal of this contact. Right now, this distal contact is open, right? So there's no pressure on this side. So we know that, so we're pretty safe. But if this was actually also pressing inwards, then we're like, oh, like once this pressure is gone, it's a possibility that this tooth may lean in, yeah? So like you wanna go look at one contact out of where it is that you're looking at, and that can give you a little bit of a prediction. Now, if you predict that it will happen, I would make the box a little wider, a little deeper, just a little bit. You can't like overdo it. And it would be great. That's a really great time to use a wedge. So like if you, let's say the contact is broken, like you broke it where it was supposed to be, but the tooth leaned inward, then yes, jam in wedges as strong as you can, and go for it. The examiners will know the fact that the tooth came in. They will know because all they see are typeodonts all day long, every day. And they will know because your box was wide buccolingually and also deep in its depth. However, your opening is not going to be that big, right? And it's almost like, depending on how much the tooth leans in, you can also see like the tooth is leaning into this other tooth that you've prepped, the space of that prep. So they will be able to see it. However, that still does not alleviate you from the guideline that you need 0.5 millimeter clearance or 0.3 to 0.5 millimeter clearance. So it's a challenging case. You know what though, like one thing that is good for you is the fact that you are practicing. If you have a typodont like this that you're working with, it is actually a good thing because you get a chance to practice with that most difficult scenario. And you'll be ready for it to the best you can be on the test day. The real worst case scenario is when you have a typodont that doesn't have that and you get it on your test day for the very first time and you've never done it before. So as difficult as it is, I really would think of it as an opportunity. And somebody asked also through email for, the question was specifically for LLU, but I'm just going to answer it in terms of schools that do not publish their guidelines. If you're going to a school that don't publish their guidelines, do we have to put retention grooves in the box? No, don't do it. No, absolutely not. We get our retention through convergence, and retention grooves are an optional feature that a lot of people will end up ruining their preps trying to place retention grooves. You're not going to get any bonus points for placing them. Like there's absolutely no point. Like you want to always be weighing what is the benefit of me trying to do this thing, and what is the cost that it could potentially cost me for trying to do this thing. And for schools that do not require retention grooves, which is like 90+% of the schools, the cost is always higher. Don't do it, okay? Because we're going for a very minimal preparation. We actually do not need additional retentive features. That's why. So just don't do it. And another question from an email was how to get the axial wall to follow the tooth curvature. I usually end up making it concave, the opposite to what it should be. Now, this is a very, very common mistake. Your axial wall is always going to need to be trimmed in with a hand instrument. Let me actually flip on my secondary camera and try drawing this out as a picture that might make a little bit more sense. Give me a moment while I switch over. Okay, I'm sorry, wire's in the way. Okay. Actually, let me do this. All right. When we are working on the box, I'm just gonna say that, I don't like red. Let's just say we're working here and we are creating our buccal wall like this and lingual wall like this. And your axial wall is like this. What this person is asking is, how do I get my axial wall to actually look like this? Because when I prep, I end up with something more like this. Now, this to some degree with the burr is completely inevitable. And that's because whichever burr you use, it doesn't matter which burr you use, your burr is always going to have a rounded cross section, right? If you cut any burr, like any burr that's like this in this direction, it's always going to be round, right? And because of that, this outward bulging out with the burr is totally inevitable. So the first thing to remember is the fact that you're always going to use hand instruments to finish off the box, or not just the box, but the axial wall itself. So the hand instrument is going to go in and chip this part out and this part out. So it's going to come in from two different angles, like that and like that, getting rid of this what would you call it? Concavity? Let's just say call it concavity. Getting rid of that and making it into something that is more parallel to this cable surface margin, which is what we want, right? Because we want our gingival floor to be equal width all the way throughout our preparation. Because we're basically placing the gingival wall right inside of the DJ. Yeah, and the DJ is like, the enamel is pretty consistent in its thickness, and therefore to keep our axial wall right inside the DJ, the gingival floor, it kind of always ends up having to also follow that. But anyway, yeah, so you're going to use your hand instruments to do it, and it's not something to rely on with your burr. All right, now let me move over to the chat room. How to keep the burr aligned with the long axis of the tooth on upper molars using indirect vision. Okay. Indirect vision, important for LLU, right? Let's just say that this is a burr. And well, it's a little tricky because I have so many things to hold at the same time. But first thing I actually want to say is it doesn't matter whether it is direct vision or indirect vision. How to do something under direct vision is exactly the same as how to do something under indirect vision. Like, nothing changes. The only thing that changes how we are viewing it. And if we are using direct vision, let's say working on the lower arch, we would just take a look like this, much simpler. When we're using indirect vision, it's just one more layer, added layer of complexity, but it's not about how to check it. It's really about how we are seeing it. And we basically have this little thing to use to see it. So it's just not a lot. It just kind of feels small, like you want to see the whole thing, but you can't. But when you are thinking about long axis, so most people, when they look at anything under indirect vision or like through the mirror, they're really trying to look at it like really close. It's really hard to get long axis looking at it too close. It's kind of like, because long axis is something that you kind of need a more forest view. Like, you need to look at like the structure in its entirety rather than you're not just focusing on like one little surface. And because of that, you want to be able to see, and also especially if you already started to work on a tooth and like it's started to be prepped already, then looking at the adjacent teeth also in the same view is so important. So if you're going to place your mirror on the typeodont, make sure you're not, let's see if I can show you like this. Make sure you're not like tilting down too much. If you tilt down a lot, obviously you're gonna be at the opposite direction, but the mirror view is the same. If you tilt down too much, you basically only get a view of the occlusal surface and not the angles of the tooth. But if you tilt it upward, it's better, right? And even better is when you pull the mirror away from the arch a little bit farther. So it's kind of like if you think about standing in front of a mirror. If the mirror is here, I can see my face. If the mirror is here, I can still see that same view. It's just a little farther away. That same thing applies here. So, and this is helpful actually not just for finding the long axis, but working on the upper arch in general, because most people will just place their thing right here, and then as soon as you start prepping, it will get dirty with the dust. Thankfully, LLU is at least not a wet exam where water sprinkles, but like, you know, when you're actually seeing patients, water gets in there, and like all these complications come up. Pull it away, maintain the angle, but pull it away, and then you'll get a really better view of it. So that's like how to use the mirror. And when you're viewing it, you want to check. So when you find the long axis, I always say, please check it from two angles. One, your buccolingual. Two is your mesiodistal. So you want to be checking it from, it's kind of like when you're surveying an RPD. You like kind of put it horizontal to the tabletop first, and then you find one angulation first, and then you go for the other angulation, right? It's pretty much the same thing. So it doesn't matter which one you go for first, but usually like looking at it from this side and getting this angle correctly first is a little easier, I find. So instead of, like, and at this point, I'm not caring about this at all. I'm only caring about this. So this is my long axis like that. And then I'm gonna be locking that into place, and obviously I won't be moving the typeodont, but I just had to show you. And then you would come back to this view and be like, okay, what from here? And it's just like that. And right now I'm using direct vision, but as I said, the use of direct versus indirect is not the thing that matters. The thing that matters is that we get a view like this, right? Where we can see the tooth we're working on and the adjacent teeth and what their buccal and lingual surfaces are like, so that we can actually get the long axis in that one view. So check it from two views at once, okay? Not at once, but like nail down this view first, and then nail down that view. And once you find it, lock your finger in. Don't change that angle. So important. What a lot of people do is they'll find it fine, and as they start to work, right now I'm just showing you with a perioprobe, but what happens is, you all know, like the Hampy's head is big, right? The Hampy's head just feels like it's covering it's taking up the prime spot to take a look at what's going on with the prep. And so you're not meaning to do it, but they like tilt the burr out so that they can get a better view of what they're doing. And obviously the left hand is the mirror. I'm holding my typeodont, so I can't show you both at the same time. But yeah, they will tilt the burr outwards so that they can get a better view of the prep. So like, it's kind of like you found a long axis and then you're not using it because you just ruined it, right? And so don't forget that once you get that long axis, that can be compromised never. Like never. You cannot put as priority your ability to view, whether it be direct or indirect, over the long axis of the preparation itself. You can never do that. We always lock in, and then you figure out from what I have left, from this little space that I do have left, I will place my mirror over here to view. That's how you have to go about it. So you have to figure out how to view while locking your hand in place, not changing the long axis, rather than giving in on the long axis. So a lot of people find the long axis first, and then they'll totally ruin it as they do the preparation because they feel like they can't see. So don't forget not to do that. And the only way to really do that is to have a really solid finger rest for first, and then for the second, whenever you shouldn't be running your burr continuously for too long, unless you're super sure about what you're doing. Like whenever you're not 100% sure that what you're doing is 100% correct, just stop your burr. And yeah, just stop your burr and get the forest view again. Like pull away from your preparation, realign everything, check what you had just done, and then restart. It's really important to do that. Most people don't take enough breaks or evaluate their work as they go to do that. Okay. Next question in the chat room. How can we break the contact while preparing a PFM from the first time without having to lower the finish line? Okay, let me switch back to my other camera to draw a photo. Not draw a photo, but draw. Okay. Oh, it's red again. Let's just say you are preparing a crown here, and the gingiva comes up this much. You have to break the contact. And you basically have like this much to use, right? Let me just make sure that I understand this question correctly. When you, without having to lower the finish line, why would you need to lower the finish line? In Kilgore typeodonts, this is pretty easy because the contacts are usually very occlusal, like really on very, very high up, and there's not much of, you know, like this kind of danger. Columbia typeodonts sometimes, especially the ones with the tight contacts that we talked about earlier, or contacts that, yeah, basically tighter contacts, may not have like as enough space gingival to the contact to make it easier. But the thing with breaking the contacts is when you first use your burr, whatever needle burr or contact breaking burr it is that you're using, your first run through is, your sole purpose here is to just break the contact. You're not trying to create a margin yet. You're not trying to do anything fancy yet. Those will all come later. You're just trying to get rid of where these two teeth meet so it doesn't touch anymore. So you want to just bring in your burr. Let's see if I can draw it. Kind of like this. What I tried to draw was the tip of the burr hanging out in this space, okay, and getting rid of the contact. So you're not using the tip of the burr, you're using the side of the burr to get through for the first time. When you're using your needle burrs, you're always using the side of the burrs. You're never using the tip of the burr, okay? You probably noticed if you tried, it burns. It's not going to leave you a good margin. It's just really, really messy. So yeah, you're using the side of the burrs, and then you're going through and going in here. Now, what I don't understand about your question is, what do you mean lower the finish line? Anyway, so you would be breaking the contacts right in the right way if you just leave the tip of the needle burr dangling inside this interproximal space. And hopefully this answers your question. I know that you are a member, and tomorrow morning we're going to have a member office hour. And so if this doesn't answer your question, let's do a follow-up there. Other question, how to increase the occlusal reduction and maintain the anatomy in case the depth grooves weren't done accurately. If your depth grooves weren't done accurately and you realize that, like, you kind of realize, like, after you've already did all the depth grooves and whatnot, and you realize, like, oops, like my interocclusal space isn't enough. If that happens, because you've already, quite frankly, lost your own occlusal anatomy, right? You're going to be looking at the teeth, the adjacent teeth, for guidance in terms of how much to lower, in terms of how up and down the anatomy should be going. All this stuff, you're going to be looking at the adjacent teeth for it. And if you just completely follow that, actually you'll be fine. So for instance, let's just say that this tooth is being worked on, and but so like the occlusal anatomy is ruined already, and like I need to kind of like do the prep, but I don't know like what to use as a reference because I already lost my references, which is my depth grooves, right? Then you look over here. You look at, okay, this is the cusp tip height. All right, my cusp tip height, depending on what prep you're doing, should be 1.5, 2, or 2, whatever, lower than this cusp tip. The marginal ridge height is going to be also that much lower. Oh, like this slope is at this kind of angle. Okay, I will replicate that angle over here, that kind of thing. Just follow this and you'll be fine. Okay, next question. And I suspected this would happen. We have about 20 minutes left, and there's, quite frankly, doesn't look like I'll be able to get through all of the questions. But every Thursday morning with our bench test mastery members, we have a session like this, and obviously the number of participants are a lot smaller, and we do it on a weekly basis. So we actually are always able to go through everybody's questions, and not just bench test technical questions. We stick around until all the questions are answered in terms of all different facets. And so if you are struggling with anything and you're wondering about whether you should join our course, whatever, quite frankly, if you feel like it'll help you, and I think it will help you, that is something that is part of the bench test mastery right now. Usually during the times where we do workshops, we also do member office hours to give, so that first, I have a chance to interact with all of our members, but second, if you have any impending questions, we can answer it for you. Okay, while preparing PFM, I'm repeatedly making undercuts while preparing the margin. I keep changing the alignment of the burr instead of keeping it parallel to the long axis of the tooth. How can I overcome this? You know what? You actually answered your own question. Your question has the answer inside it. The reason you're making an undercut is because you're changing the alignment of the burr. So First, you said that you're preparing a PFM. I would actually, like, if you find yourself making mistakes like this, I would actually suggest that you work on molar full gold crowns first. And the reason for this is because it is actually difficult. It's the best place to start crown preps is molar full gold crowns in terms of your general practice schedule or whatever. You want to start from molar full gold crowns, and that's because first, the tooth is large, and it's just one type of margin that you're having to practice, a chamfer. It's really difficult to do a good shoulder if you first don't know how to do a good chamfer. And when you're working on a chamfer, you want to always be working on the wall and the chamfer, like coming out of it at the same time. You don't want to be working on the wall first and then going back in and like adjusting the margin. Whenever you do that, you are really putting yourself at risk for an undercut, especially if you change the alignment of the burr. And this happens very often. Let me switch back to my other camera one more time. Okay. Okay. Axial wall, chamfer. Why is this not? Let's just say it's like that, and then like this is like the occlusal surface. Whatever. So this is the axial wall. This is the chamfer. And the gingiva is here. Okay. You always, always, always want to be bringing in your burr in a way where the entire burr is in contact with this wall. And for chamfer, obviously, we're looking at half of the width of the burr, creating the chamfer. So the burr should always look like this. Things are probably a little out of proportion here, but bear with me. You can see it, right? So this blue thing right here is your burr. And see how it's in complete sync with this wall and the margin? We use this burr because this shape, this half of the burr shape, vertically cut, is the shape that we want the wall and our margin to look like. And so whenever you are bringing in your burr from a different angle, and the angle that people bring it in all the time from is this kind of angle. To touch parts of the margin, they come in like this. But this margin, I mean, I'm blowing up this like drawing so much larger than a tooth actually is, right? Like look at this tooth. How much smaller is it, right? And we want to create the chamfer width to be like 0.5 millimeter wide. It's so little. It's pretty impossible to be able to actually just touch up on the margin and not touch this wall. And the moment you touch this wall, guess what you're creating? An undercut. Like that. So that is why I say you answered your own question. You cannot change the alignment of your burr. You have to always keep it the same. And the easiest way to do that first is the alignment of the burr should just be parallel to the long axis of the tooth at all times, right? But after you kind of got the structure of your wall and everything in place, then just bring it in and make sure that it is budding completely, like completely in sync, and it's touching the entire wall. If you just do that, then you're fine. So even when you're trying to really do something just on the margin, the burr has to at least lightly swipe across the axial surfaces. If it doesn't, And if you are bringing it in like this because you're scared to do something wrong here, you're actually going to do more damage, because an undercut is really the worst enemy of a crown. Well, one of the really bad ones anyway, right? And so like how you, let's say, smoothen a margin and keep it in sync without widening the margin is a completely separate topic, but this really has to do with pressure, where you're putting pressure, and your hand skills itself. So if you're unable to do that, then what the area you actually want to be looking at is lightening your pressure, lightening the pressure between your burr and the tooth, because a prep is a very honest thing. It will show exactly, like it will leave marks behind exactly as it must, if you will, like mechanically speaking. If you press down hard in a certain area, it will show, like it will prepare a lot more in that area. If you brush over an area very lightly, then even though you're going over the same area, it will react very differently than if you are pressing harder on that surface with the burr and going it across, right? Like if you press harder, it's actually going to deepen. If you don't, but if you barely have any pressure, it's just going to sweep across and just smoothen without actually deepening or widening or whatever. So wherever, if you find that you're deepening, if you find that you're widening, in whatever direction it is, always take that as feedback to, okay, in that direction, I have placed too much pressure. Let me lighten it. And to lighten that, you need a very sturdy hand rest. Finger rest is what I am talking about. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. But I actually really like how you were able to, you pretty much knew the answer to your own question when you asked it. So I definitely like that. For maxillary class 2, if we are asked to do a MOD, should the oblique ridge be broken or not? Broken. It is impossible to do a MOD without breaking the oblique ridge. You cannot go across you can't go from the mesial surface to the distal surface in one preparation without breaking the oblique ridge. Impossible. However, do note that whenever there are two separate preparations on a single tooth, let's say for the classic upper molar design, it's, you'll leave the oblique ridge intact and you'll do a MO and OL. That is written out differently. Like that is written out MO/OL. Or like if they wanted two separate preparations, they can't say do a MOD, they have to say do a MO-DO. And that will mean there are two separate preparations. Okay, I keep the oblique ridge intact. But if they say MOD, then yeah, you have to break it. How to check the occlusal reduction by closing the typeodont or with neighboring teeth. You know what? Some schools don't even allow you to close the typeodont. I'm going to say both, whatever you can. Like whatever you have, whatever means you have to do it. Like if you are going to a school that allows you to close the typeodont, then you actually be wanting to use all of the means you have possible to you. If you're not allowed to, then one of those means will go away. One of the things that, so if you just look at all of the different ways, we can close the typeodont, right? And either stick something in between there or just look with a mirror, whatnot. We can look at neighboring teeth, but really you want to make sure that you have enough interocclusal room first by giving deep enough depth grooves. That's where it all starts. So you want to put that in there. But if you've already connected your depth grooves, that is gone, right? Like you no longer have the means to check how deep your depth grooves are. And at that point, you'll be left with those two means, closing the typeodont or checking with neighboring teeth. And you want to use all means possible. So do both if you can. If you're not allowed to close the typeodont, then just neighboring teeth. What you're gonna do? Yeah. But when you do close the typeodont, by the way, like right now, mine comes together pretty well. It's pretty well, like it's occluding well. But sometimes I will see typeodonts that just close horrendously badly. And the likelihood of you getting a typeodont that, let's say, occludes, let's just say like this, during a test is pretty low. But you may get, like, especially if you buy a typeodont secondhand or whatever, it might be completely out. And therefore, in those cases, closing the typeodont's jaws to check the interocclusal clearance is not going to work, obviously, because even if you like don't reduce very much, because they're not in occlusion very well to start with, it's going to look like you have more clearance than you actually have. And that's just one of the reasons why you want to use all of the means possible. But first, make sure that, I'm not even going to say well calibrated. You don't have to make sure that the typeodont is completely calibrated. Like if you want to go that far, every time you switch out a tooth, you have to recalibrate it. That's ridiculous. No, but at least make sure that they come together like this, like just solidly, like a person would, and they're not like in some ridiculously weird occlusion. And if you find yourself with a typeodont that is kind of in ridiculously weird occlusion, these screws, this is what that's for. You're going to loosen, you're not going to completely take it off, but like just loosen these two screws up, hold it tight with your hands, and then screw them back together. And that is completely more than enough as calibration for your typeodont. Okay. But yeah, you can't really do anything in terms of closing the typeodont. And you can't really do anything that needs closing the typeodont with any kind of accuracy if the typeodont occlusion is completely off. And you'd be surprised how often I see that when our members send in their work for feedbacks. And oftentimes, like let's say when they do a crown, they will send me sometimes like with the typeodont closed, like a view from like diagonally up or whatnot to show me the interocclusal clearance, and I see that their typeodonts are off. So yeah, that's what you want to do. Make sure you don't have excuse me, sorry. Yeah, you want to make sure that you do not have a typeodont off like that, because at least if you're relying on like closing the type, like if you're just keeping this open all the time, it obviously doesn't matter. But if you have to check anything like that, it's going to matter a lot, right? I have a question, you guys. Do you like this format better than our usual format where I actually have like a presentation? Like, I did anticipate that I would not be able to go through all of the questions within, you know, our workshop time, but like if you guys enjoy this a lot, then I can increase the number of like ask me anything sessions that we do. So yeah, just tell me what format you find more helpful. And because obviously we're doing these workshops too because we want to help you. And yeah, and also like if you have questions that, or like topics that you'd like me to cover, also send that in as well. So far we have 2 feedbacks and it's 50-50. So, but really, like, put in the chat room or even email in, because we're really putting these weekly workshops on to hopefully be as best of a help to you as we can. And somebody said this format is really great as long as all our questions are answered. I'm not quite sure that I will ever be able to get to everybody's questions within an hour, but we do that for office hours. with our bench test mastery members. And it's possible because it's a much smaller group. It's quite impossible if it is a group this size, but we'll do our best to do that. And as you noticed, I do get through the questions that come in through email first. So email in your questions and like ahead of time, and that will increase the chances for me being able to get to them. Okay, then I think I have barely enough time for one last question. Let me find out where I left off. Okay, how do we keep and maintain a good finger rest while preparing teeth in the upper left quadrant in indirect vision? If you are a right-handed operator, the upper left quadrant is much more difficult than the upper right. I'm just going to separate my jaws apart again. So first thing is, it is always probably going to be the more difficult quadrant to deal with. And that's natural, like that's normal, unless you can use both your right and your left hand on your handpiece. I greatly envy those dentists that can do that. I think that's awesome. I can't do that. So, you know, there's always going to be that little bit of just more challenge while you're working here. Keeping and maintaining a finger rest, and this actually it's more universal. It doesn't matter where you're working, but you always have to, when you're like starting out practicing, you have to make a solid finger rest into second nature. That is like one of the very first things that you have to kind of master, if you will. You have to make that yours first before you can really even adhere to the ideal preparation measures or like the criteria that schools want. So if you've been practicing, you know this. It's very exacting, and the dimensions are really small. And so if your burr is loosey-goosey, then it is impossible to create a preparation adhering to the standards. The only way you can get there is with a really solid, like, and stable, non-shaky burr in hand, right? Otherwise, like, you just do these things that you didn't want to. That's what happens. Like, oh, like you never would make a chamfer like 1 millimeter wide because you wanted to. It's always like, oh, I didn't mean to, but it happened, or I didn't mean to create an undercut, but it's happening. There's always an underlying reason to it. And like the easiest way to talk about the finger rest really is like the isthmus width. Like, if nobody makes their isthmus wider than 1 millimeter because they want to, it's like everybody knows and this isthmus is supposed to be 1 millimeter, but so many people make it more wider, and it's because they feel like, from the operator side, it feels like it just kind of happened and you're not sure why it keeps happening. It just keeps happening. Yeah. The reason it keeps happening is because your really fine control over your handpiece is not quite there. And the fastest shortcut to getting there is the solid finger rest. And that's because, and I'm backing up several steps, but this is such an important topic that I do want to cover it. That's because in our normal life, which really our hands and arms are really made better for, we don't measure things in 0.3 millimeters. Like 1 millimeter, 1.2 millimeter, it's like, what's the big deal? It's pretty much the same thing. But when we're doing preps, it's a huge deal, right? But it's so exacting but we're having to use these really, really fine motor skills that we just don't use in our everyday lives. So our muscles, our arm muscles, are not used to working in those little fine little bits. But that's what you have to do an ideal preparation well. Our arm muscles are much more like I can move my arm far at once. Like they're designed much more for things like that. So what we need to do is all of our force, like our really strong arms, need to be absorbed somewhere, and it cannot be the handpiece. If that force from our arm goes to the handpiece, then you have a handpiece that is like out of control. You have a handpiece that will do things that you didn't want it to do, and that's why, because like it's just like too fine. So what you need to do is your finger rest needs to be actively engaged. And I don't know if you can see, like my fourth finger is what I'm going to be using, and the difference between this and this. Do you see how like my fingernail is becoming blanched? This is not a finger rest. It's loose. I'm placing my finger there, but I'm not engaging it. This, when the blood is drained out of my fingernail tip, that is an engaged finger rest. That is what you need. And you need to make this second nature. And I want you to actually make it into second nature, hopefully while you're working tabletop, before you even start working mounted. That would be a better way to do it than like trying when you work mounted for the first time. So, and if that actually becomes your second nature, this is not going to change because you're in this quadrant versus this quadrant, because you will not start working unless your finger rest is actively engaged. See this, right? Like for me, it's already it is completely second nature. Like I would never run my handpiece like this. I can't. It doesn't. I couldn't do that. Like naturally, I will press and run my handpiece. And you see that the blood blanching out of, like, it's becoming white. So yeah, like that's what I am actually going to say, is make sure that it is your second nature and you're not having to constantly think about it. If you are, I mean, you do have to start from somewhere. And for most people that, and myself included, when I was practicing for the bench test, I did not have a finger rest. I thought like, oh yeah, I'll place my finger here, and then I do, and I was like, of course I have a finger rest. My finger's right there. But that's not a finger rest. It's not engaged. It's not doing anything. So what it is like, if somebody is gonna like, or try to press it away, you have to have enough force in here to like withstand it. Yeah, so anyway, when you're working on this, I probably place my finger rest on, let's say if I'm working on the first molar, I would place it right here, right distal to it. You can even put it here, but don't put it far away. This is too far. You lose control the farther away your burr is from your finger rest. You lose more and more control. So you want to be as close to the operating surface as you can, humanly can. And good thing is this is a typeodont. They don't feel anything. It doesn't matter where you place your it doesn't matter where you place your, and it doesn't matter how much pressure you give there either. Nobody feels a thing, right? So yeah, hopefully that helps. Okay, and okay, yeah. And then somebody asked, how long does it usually take to prepare for the bench test? It really actually is pretty personal, because everybody's kind of innate hand skill level is very different. For the most average, but I've never seen anybody regret having practiced too much. I really never see that. What I always see is, I didn't practice enough. I should have started sooner. I waited until I got my interview call. That's what I see all the time. And that's what is the saddest scenario to me. And in my opinion, is like, you get a call, you have 3 weeks left, and you haven't, like, this is your first interview, so you're like not prepared at all, and you're just like, you're late. You're late to the game, and all of your competitors were already practicing for a few months, maybe because they went to an interview 2 months ago, whatever, right? So just start. Start after you're done sending in your applications. That's like what I really want to tell everybody is, you're never going to regret practicing too much. And even if you don't get a call this season, whatever you practice, it stays with you. You're not starting from scratch next season again. I can promise you that. So yeah, don't wait to get started with your bench test. This has been, I think, like my main message for the international dentist community since day one. Please don't wait until you have a bench test to get started with your bench test practice. Just get started. Like, you know, this is a hurdle you have to overcome. You know that the standards are getting higher and higher every single year. And like, why limit your choices? Like, you want to be the best prepared for what you can be when you go, right, for the bench test. All right. So yeah, as I said, if there are any members here that I didn't get, and if I didn't get to your question, we're meeting tomorrow morning, 8:30 in the morning Pacific time, in our member site. So stay tuned and just bring your questions over there and we'll talk about things farther. For those who are not members, keep your questions kind of in tap until our next Ask Me Anything session. There will be another one, but yeah. I may like alternate or something like that. Anyway, next week's workshop is going to be on interviewing. Kevin will be leading that workshop, and so come. Even if you don't have an interview, just come. Like, every week, it's so interesting how, like, Kevin had a workshop last Wednesday, about what should I ask the interviewer, and then I get an email for this week's Ask Me Anything. Oh, what should I ask the interviewer? Like, I wish you were there. You know what I mean? So just come to these workshops, even if you don't have an interview. Just take notes and revisit them later. I promise they'll be super, super helpful. And that's all. If you are interested in working with me, or you have any questions about how working with me works, underneath here, you should see a little pop-up thingy that comes up that asks if you have any questions about bench test mastery. Just fill in that little form and it'll take you to a page where you can schedule a time to talk to me about how it all works. If you are wondering how bench test mastery works, or if you want any more information on that, or whatever, you can just schedule a time to chat. If you want to join Bench Test Mastery, you can click the yellow button that says Get Bench Test Mastery. That's underneath this chat room. Just so scroll down a little bit, and there's your link right there. And once you do join, you basically will have instant access to all of our course material right away. And for the feedbacks, the way it works is just like I was like explaining things to you like this, and you know, when our members send in feedback, they also ask me questions, and I answer it in my voice in a video format, in addition to giving feedback on the particular work they have submitted. So any other questions that came up while doing the work, I also answered in that format as well. So yeah, just another thing about how we work with members. So yeah, that's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for coming, and I really do appreciate your input in terms of what works for you. So I will be going through the chat room after we get off the call to see like what all of you had to say about this format versus the other format. So yeah, let's keep that feedback coming. We're definitely doing these to help you the best we can. And whoever has interviews coming up, I wish you the best of luck. I know you're probably really nervous. And yeah, that's it. Have a great evening, and join us tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but hopefully again next Wednesday for a interview workshop. All right, you guys, bye.